Being a pilot can sound like a pretty cool job, right? All I can imagine is stepping into a cockpit and having control of this giant aircraft and its passengers. Stepping onto an airplane and flying to your destination, one thing you may not realize is that the pilot is controlling pretty much only the takeoff and landing. Computers are doing the rest. According to USA Today, most takeoffs and all landings are done manually. In highly automated aircraft, the automation, or the autopilot, is engaged soon after takeoff and disengaged within 5 miles of the destination. This came from an airline captain who answered the question of how much hands-on flying pilots actually do. As a student with a passion for flying airplanes, I wouldn't want technology to totally take my exciting job of flying airplanes. As technology is changing at a rapid speed and automation is becoming more common in our society, it cannot be more than about 30 years until airplanes are no longer in need of pilots. First, I'll be explaining how technology has impacted airplanes over the years. Second, I'll go over how automation is affecting pilots today and in the future. And lastly, what the role of a pilot in the cockpit is today. First, let me cover how airplanes have progressed to where they are now. In the last 30 years, many electronical changes were made in airplanes that affects how hard pilots have to work in the cockpit. USA Today asked a pilot how his job has changed in the last 30 years. He replied, "The integration of automation has drastically changed the flight deck. In the 1970s and 80s, autopilots were primitive and required the constant attention of the pilots. Today, the navigation system is integrated with the autopilot. The airplane flies a precise path through the sky, and pilots know their estimated time of arrival and fuel remaining throughout the flight." To simplify what he's saying, for most of the flight, pilots are monitoring the screens as the computer brings the plane to its destination. Not only did the way the plane flies change, the pilot equipment has made great advancements as well. For example, communication and radars, which are very important during flight time, have drastically improved. The radios are now satellite, and the weather radars now show wind and precipitation instead of a green return for rain. With these upgrades, pilots can now keep a closer lookout for unexpected weather in extreme cases in which they would have to take control of the plane. So now that we know how technology changes over the years in airplanes, let's take a look at how this will affect pilots' careers. 30 years ago, being a pilot was a super fun job where people got to fly airplanes. Today, it seems as if people forget about the job, leading to a pilot shortage that we have right now. The pilot shortage is a reason automated cockpits are more quickly becoming a thing. In an article, John Osterer and Andy Pastor state, Boeing projects a need for 533,000 new commercial airline pilots over the next 20 years as the number of miles flown doubles. This is a big problem in our society now that flights are cheaper than they were decades ago, and people are flying more regularly. So how could the government combat this issue? Automation. Oster and Pastor also state that in the future, cockpits may only consist of one pilot and a co-pilot controlling the plane from the ground. This is a closer step to what could be a completely flight automated future. However, this can take some time as there's many safety issues involved. Some may argue that technology cannot replace the human mind in some cases, and an outlook on a pilot's career may be more realistic with a single pilot cockpit, as there's still someone to correct any computer errors. With these technological changes, let's cover what jobs the pilot has in the cockpit. Other than doing takeoff and landing, pilots have one big role in a plane's flight. They make all the decisions of the flight path, as well as monitor all the equipment. They also make sure the autopilot doesn't fail to ensure safety to the passengers. In Don't Freak Out Over Boeing's Self-Flying Planes, Robots Already Run the Skies, author Jack Stewart states, "Autopilot is, at the most basic level, pretty simple. It uses the pilot's input to adjust and maintain the airplane's heading, altitude, and speed. The pilot doesn't use the yoke or pedals, but provides all the commands that the computer executes. Airlines started using this tech decades ago. The pilots are still there. In most airlines, they're in control of the autopilot. They monitor the fuel and weather conditions. A running argument is whether or not computers can remove the risk of human error. As monitoring all this equipment can be done from the ground, there's always a problem of the connection getting some sort of interference and we won't be able to take control of the aircraft. There have been cases where the autopilot has failed. In June 2019, Air France Flight 447 crashed into the Atlantic Ocean and killed all 228 people on board. This was due to a failure in the autopilot. There was no way for the pilots to disengage the autopilot and take control as the airline didn't allow that. Stewart states, "For now, humans still beat computers when it comes to dealing with a medical emergency, security incidents, or a quick mechanical fix. With the technology we have access to in today's society, we're not yet ready for self-flying planes. This can also be proven with what Jack Stewart was saying. In a medical emergency, flight attendants on board the aircraft would not be able to conduct an emergency landing as the plane would be locked in autopilot. Yet another downside to automation." Now we can recap on what I covered in this speech. As technology continues to improve, it's not much longer until pilots get their exciting job taken away from them because of computers. I went over how technology has impacted how airplanes are controlled over the decades. Secondly, how pilots' careers are affected today as well as in the future. And finally, what the role is in the cockpit for humans versus the computers. Overall, we live in a society where automation is becoming the next big thing. It is rapidly advancing, perhaps faster than we can even think about the challenges it leaves us. With a current pilot shortage, self-flying planes can be projected as only a few decades away. Thank you for listening.